first with some news that broke late on Tuesday night. Look, we still haven't talked about some other conference realignment that has been going on. But what about conference realignment that might not be going on? Because multiple reports and our own research indicates that there is ongoing discussions between Clemson, Florida State, the Atlantic Coast Conference on revenue distribution. But before we get into the nitty gritty of this, if you could just like surface level, is this a path forward for Clemson and Florida State to remain in the ACC for the rest of this decade?
For the rest
of this decade, not for a decade, to round out the roaring 20s as a member of the ACC?
The devil is in the details, but I think the answer is yes.
Okay.
If the details are amenable to both sides, obviously. So if you recall, back at the 2023 spring meeting, so about 20 months ago, Florida State and Clemson were like, hey, if you want us to continue to carry the conference from a rating standpoint, continue to be nationally relevant, we need a certain amount of money that is equal to what the SEC and the Big Ten teams make, because that is our peers in terms of who we recruit against. And they wanted that to be tied to ratings. How much ratings do you bring in? Florida State and Clemson, I believe, they're like 35 or 40% of the ACC's ratings, right? But everybody gets an equal, whatever the number is. Like they have a chart that they contend. I'm sure the ACC has a different chart, but it is like they're worth more than like the bottom half of the conference put together in terms of ratings. So they wanted to be paid as such. This is something we have discussed that we think eventually will probably happen to other leagues, right? Like we've used does Ohio State going to continue to get the same amount as Indiana long term? Will Alabama?
I don't know the way things are going.
Well, sure. Like will Bama continue to accept the same amount as Mississippi State or Vanderbilt? But when you are behind in revenue, as the ACC schools are, your issue is a little more pressing. So Clemson and Florida State proposed this like 20 months ago, and the ACC told them to kick rocks. But something has changed for the ACC to come back. And so Dellinger's report and CBS's report do not say who brought this up. ESPN claims that it was FSU and Clemson's proposal, which I think if in a very long-term reading of that, yes, because they're sort of like revisiting that initial proposal that we threw out like at this table 20 months ago. But from my understanding, this was the ACC coming to Florida State and Clemson with, hey, you want to revisit that thing that was thrown out there about 20 months ago?
What do you think spurned this conversation now? Because I know a lot of people want to dunk on Florida State, say, "Oh, they're 0-3. They have no leverage. They've lost everything. They're coming back." There's also, I think, what happened with the other conference realignment news that came out, that all of a sudden things look a little bit more unstable once again, with the Mountain West potentially having issues. The American potentially, adding Air Force. Like, there's just more news out there. What do you think precipitated, like right now, why we're getting it? Is just the reporting coming out?
So there's two separate questions there, right? Let's try to hit them both. The first is, why would this be offered up now? The other is, why would it be floated now? Like what's the motivation behind the offer? What's the motivation behind the leak? I think first we should tackle the offer. This lawsuit is going better for Florida State than I thought it would. Some of the arguments that I thought were kind of specious and would be tossed out have not been tossed out. And you can follow a lot of people who are maybe more pro ACC. Obviously, I'm an FSU alum, so I'm biased in this. But if you follow like a lot of the legal analysis out there, it's like, wait, really? Like the judge is letting that go and letting that go. It's not a lot of this stuff that I think many folks anticipated, including some of my Florida State lawyer friends, thought would be tossed, has not been tossed. And so the odds that Florida State gets out and pays zero, like, hey, we are out scot-free. We own our rights right now. We're not going to have to cut some kind of big check to the ACC, I still believe remain very small. But like 7% is still better than 0.5%. And if there's been a material change in those odds, like the nuclear option odds, whoa, what if these big brands, what if they get out totally free? I think there are some schools in this league that would have to worry, like, oh, crap, Carolina could go too. Miami could go too. And if you're Wake Forest, you would basically be valued on the market like an American Conference team. and they make about $9 million a year. And right now you make 44. So you have to sort of make a value judgment. You have to talk to your counsel and you have to say, man, what are the odds what are the odds Florida State and Clemson like straight up win? Like not a settlement in their favor. Like what are the odds they win? And I don't think those odds are great, but I do think they have increased from like super, super, super tiny to just a little bit less tiny than that, right? In recent weeks. So if you're able to sort of reintroduce that proposal, maybe it's a little bit sweetened because you have less leverage now than you did 20 months ago. And you've been in mediation, which is court ordered. I think that is as far as like the why.
Yeah, the timeline is because we're like a month separated from when they were, in the court ordered mediation. So
Correct.
It's like, and I know, Bud, you and I talked about this.
That's when it came up, what I was told. It was during mediation.
Yeah, and you've got, just in terms of university business and getting the university presidents to talk about this stuff, you kind of spend some time before the school year starts walking away from stuff. And then once everybody gets all the kids back on campus, university business starts back up, and so does conference business when it comes to these meetings. All these meetings where the ACC presidents are discussing this were all previously scheduled. None of this is emergency. This is just what has come up, and now these university presidents are letting the media know. I mean, do you think this is trial balloon? Because to me, I'm not even ready to say this is going to be the answer. To me, this feels very trial balloon.
Totally. Like I know that Florida State wants to get to 80, which is like 40 million more. I'm very confident in what my sources tell me on that. Do I think they'll get to 80, which is roughly like what the SEC schools are going to be making pretty soon? I don't know about that. But again, it just comes down to what do you think your chances are to win at trial on both sides? And what are you willing to do as far as taking a haircut? Because how this would work, the mechanics of it, are that everybody would take slightly less revenue as far as guaranteed revenue. It would all go into a ratings pot. You would have to basically have some concession for basketball because basketball does represent some value to the league, right? It's probably like 80-20 football, but you can argue it more. You could go 85-15, you could go 64, whatever you want to do there. But allowing for the good basketball teams who pull good basketball ratings to also share in this likely secures you votes. And you're going to need 12 out of 18 teams, because Notre Dame gets a vote in this as well, to vote for the proposal. Obviously, if it's sweet enough, Florida State and Clemson would vote yes. I have no idea how the Irish would vote. You can argue it both ways as to who would vote for this and who wouldn't. But yeah, they would go into a ratings pool based on how your ratings would would be what you pull. I mean, for instance, Florida State is a terrible team this year. They're 0-3. They just played a group of 5 team, and they still pulled almost 2 million viewers, which is ridiculous, right? For that profile of a game. So that would keep Florida State and Clemson happy.
Which, by the way, Saturday night, it's just like a quick Saturday night when I was cracking jokes about those ratings charts and the value charts, it's because it's funny. I'd never have doubted Florida State's brand value or their television ratings. Anytime they play a team with a pulse, it is on one of the largest stages that television executives can put you on. A recent assessment of like the last 5 years of those ABC ACC games, basically every single one of them involves Florida State, Clemson, Miami, North Carolina. And I think there's like a fifth one in there, but it's like that. I am not doing that. I am saying it's funny that the team that gets the most eyeballs is tripping over itself. That's all. That's all I'm saying. I'm not questioning the veracity of your charts.
I don't think anybody is questioning your veracity on that, are they?
The realignment account is very upset with Chip. Chip doesn't understand football if he doesn't understand television.
Realignment account.
He's got a bad football mind.
Yeah, realignment Twitter came after me, just because I was having some fun. Heaven forbid we have fun during the season.
I feel like I'm going to be like re-exposed to Twitter when Twitter finally kills like the old school TweetDeck hack. But like I still experience Twitter via old school TweetDeck. So like I'm just not seeing stuff that I don't want to see.
What I don't understand, like if it's a trial balloon, who's the trial balloon for? If this was first broached at the mediation,
I think it's a way to
presidents.
Well, yeah, on both sides.
Why wouldn't you just approach them?
Because university presidents need to feel things out. See, like they don't want to make a decision that makes anybody mad. They need to. They need to see.
But why wouldn't you just talk to them about it? Why do you have to leak it?
This is interesting. So are you leaking it to try to gauge public sentiment? Are you leaking it to try to put pressure on other university presidents? Are you leaking it to try to put pressure on Florida State and Clemson to say yes to this? Right? Because it is crafty that you're like, hey, this is basically the proposal that you all threw out 2 years ago. Do you no longer want to agree to that proposal? It's also a way to take the temperature of how Florida State and Clemson truly feel about their chances of winning at trial.
There's, like you said, they want 80 million. There's
Correct.
no way they're going to get that.
So if everybody takes a 20% haircut, right, you would go from 44 to like 35.
Uh-huh.
That is still 4 times what you would make as an American team. That's kind of the calculus if you're like a Wake or a Syracuse or
Yeah,
Boston
but
College.
what leverage does Florida State have to get that?
It's
The Big
fear
Ten
that-
hasn't offered you a spot. The SEC hasn't offered you a spot.
They're
How
not
are you
going
going
to
to say
though,
they
like
want
I-
80?
Yeah, but Tom, like, do you really think that so implied in the you would have to take a crazy haircut down to 8 or 9 million is that those schools have walked with their rights free and clear, at which point they would certainly have a spot.
But if Florida State is considering doing this, that is an admission that they don't have that option available to them.
That is not true.
If
What you're
Florida
missing-
State could join the Big Ten, why would they take this deal?
It's all likelihoods of winning or losing, right? Let's say there's a 60% chance that they win at trial, which I think is way too high, right? But as far as like an
Uh-huh.
outright win at trial, in that case, they would have their rights free and clear, and they would be able to walk to the Big Ten. Then you get the additional calculus. What kind of share would you get in the Big Ten starting out? I don't think they would get a full share, personally. I think people
Neither
who
do
think that are kind of nuts, right? So it's basically all just formulaic. What's your percentage chance you win outright at trial and get your rights? You don't have to pay any kind of exit fee. Okay, then you have your rights. You go to the Big Ten, they pay you X. So in this time period, you're making Y. Then the next calculus is what's the chance you get out, but you actually have to pay a substantial exit fee? What is the cost to finance that exit fee if you want? Again, same calculus comes back. What is your share from the Big Ten now that you have your rights?
Hold on. How much does Florida State get now annually in its current deal?
Like 44.
What do you think the percentage chance that they get free and clear of this via the lawsuit is?
Like 5%.
So they're making 44 million now. You
Sure.
think they've got a 5% chance of getting out of this deal without having to pay anything. And you think they're going to be able to tell the ACC, we want you to double what you're giving us when they don't have another landing spot, and that the landing spot they currently might have wouldn't give them the same full share they're giving everybody else? What leverage gives them that option? There is no way in hell they're going to get 80 million a year.
Well, 2 things here. One, I reject the premise they don't have a landing spot if they have their rights free and clear. I think that's silly to even contemplate that.
But you just said there's only a 5% chance they get their free and clear.
No. Free and clear, meaning you don't have to pay for it.
You just said there's only a 5% chance of that happening.
Correct,
Oh,
but there's also
free.
the chance that they pay a
So,
settlement and do have their rights to
5%
get
of
out.
44 million, then plus the 60 million you'd get from the Big Ten.
That's not how
I
the
mean-
math works on that, though. Right? Like you're not hitting.
Well,
the
where are you going to
44%
get 80
5%.
million? If something has a 5% chance of happening, I'm not going to agree to double what I'm giving you.
Well, you didn't really let me finish on this. Okay. The
Okay,
5%.
finish.
Sure.
But no, the
5%.
math is still the math.
Can I finish?
Yes.
So the 5% is, I mean, we're just using made up numbers here, but that's you winning completely a trial, not winning your rights back. That's winning and paying nothing. Okay. There's a far greater chance that you win the settlement, you get your rights free and clear, you pay some amount as an exit fee to leave. The worry for the other ACC schools is the destabilizing effect that would have on the league. The less Florida State has to pay to get out, and that would include the 0, but also like the non-zero number, right, that they would have to pay for an exit fee, the greater odds that other schools leave as well, which there are certain schools out there that would have to take like an 80% cut if a majority of the league was going to leave, because they would not have a home that would pay them any sort of significant revenue, right? So for them, it's sort of a risk assessment. What are the true, like, what is their counsel telling them about Florida State and Clemson actually winning at trial outright? What is their counsel telling them about what a likely settlement, if Florida State was going to leave, would look like? And what would it cost us to have stability for the next 5 years, at which point probably all this stuff blows up anyway, and maybe we don't even have conferences by 2031.
These are all great what ifs. But if the number you suggest that there is a 5% chance that they can get out of this free and clear, why am I settling if I'm the ACC? I've got the same chance of survival basically either way. They're either going to get out free and clear or I'm going to settle to let them go. And then I'm in the same boat I would be if that 5% hits, but I've
So
got a
you're
little extra spending cash.
So you're well, if the 5% hits, you get no extra spending cash.
Yeah.
I think there's a far greater chance, like maybe 50 or 60%, that they get a pretty decent deal to walk and then they pay out that, right? I think that's what you're missing. The 5% is like the GOR is invalidated, Florida State and Clemson walk paying nothing. There's a much greater chance that they have to pay something, right? And that
What's
point,
the something? I mean,
like
I know
an
this is impossible to answer, but I'm just saying by your
Sure.
estimation.
let's call it 125. Pre-trial, I would have called it like 250. That's
okay.
still a lot. Like again, that goes into your risk assessment here. You see what I'm saying?
I think I would call the bluff, honestly.
So
But
why
don't
are
you think-
why are you revisiting the proposal if you guys if the ACC was very much like, shove it 20 months ago? Something's changed in their risk assessment.
Well, we don't know who's floating this trial balloon.
Why would they even have discussions on it?
Why would the ACC float it when they could just talk to the other presidents?
Okay, float it to the media, sure, but why would you reintroduce this idea that you shot down 20 months ago?
Do we know for a fact they reintroduced it, or was this part of the mediation?
They reintroduced it during mediation. That's what I'm saying.
We know that they did it, though.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That just doesn't make sense to me on the ACC's part.
It suggests to me that they feel like they have less leverage than they once did. How much leverage, how much less is, that's kind of incalculable, right?
Yeah, but I feel like you're giving Florida State and Clemson way too much leverage here because I don't think they have it.
Well, I think we can debate who has more leverage. I would be surprised if you could argue that they have less leverage than they did prior.
That's true, but if you only had 5% and now it's up to 7%, is it really? I don't know. It's just I don't see a situation because again, I won't be shocked if Florida State ends up in the Big Ten at some point down the line. I think that's far more likely that they end up somewhere, whether it's the Big Ten or whatever the hell the new landscape of college football is. But I don't think the Big Ten's dying to add them right now. So if I'm the ACC, I might just say, stick it out and see what happens.
Didn't
And
you guys
also,
think
I don't think it's a
No, that's
coincidence.
possible.
I don't think it's a coincidence that if it is the ACC floating this, that they're floating it after Florida State's gotten off to a terrible start.
One thing
That's
I think is interesting. Morgan in the
Start
chat.
on the field, not start in the courtroom, right?
Correct. On the field, I think maybe
Yeah.
if it's the ACC floating it, and we know that for sure, that could be related to the 0-3 start because maybe they're thinking, Florida State might be a little desperate now.
Morgan in the chat, I thought, put up a good point. If FSU loses, they're stuck in the ACC. If the ACC loses, they potentially die. I think that's very real. I think that's a good one. I also thought one of the things that was in all this news that we got was the fact that this is only through 2030. Like in the way Chip's question was proposed. I think that's probably the most interesting where it's like, oh, I haven't heard that aspect because we've heard about this. Bud mentioned at Amelia Island a year and a half ago or whenever it was when they first started floating some of these unequal revenue shares. No one's ever taught. Everyone's always been 2036, 2036, 2036. And what is interesting is those are the 2030 is the same year that the Big 10 and Big 12 deals expire. That to me was sort of the new news that we got that somebody's willing to potentially, shorten the deal that feels like it's a jail sentence for Florida State and Clemson.
We have no idea how any of this is going to go.
And there you have it.
That's very true.
I mean,
Well, I mean, the Florida State
I think
fans in the
if you're
comments
Florida
know how it's
State,
gonna go.
if you're Florida State, I think you should take the deal if the deal is what has been floated. Again, we have no idea.
I also
All right, you
think
want 80, but what will you settle for?
That's
Correct.
the thing. And
Would you take 70?
Would you take 60?
I don't think they would take 60. I think they would fight that out at trial.
Maybe 65. I don't. But there's a point to it though that, especially with the 2030, where if you're Florida State, you're just thinking, man, how do we stay competitive with Ohio State, Bama, Big Ten schools, SEC schools? How do we compete with them? yes, we can manage some slight deficit. We can get our boosters to kick in. Maybe we do some other creative ideas to create revenue. And then all of a sudden it's only till 2030. Yeah, we can make that work. I think that's where the discussions are being had right now. And I think it's really interesting because I don't know what that number is, but maybe it's halfway and maybe that's the ACC's, maybe that's their point. It's we can get you to 60. We're not getting you to 80. And I think that's probably the discussion that Florida State and Clemson are having is what's manageable for us until 2030.
What does the Big Ten bring in?
I don't know. It's
80
like
next year?
Something to 80, yeah.
75, 80?
Yeah, somewhere in there.
I mean,
it's hard to remember because everybody's getting a different share right now.
Sure. So, like, if you're taking a half share for your first, let's say somehow Florida State got out and had to pay a settlement number, not the free and clear option, but like they own their rights free and clear, but they had to pay to get them. If you're having to take a half share in the Big Ten for 2 or 3 years, there's a very real possibility that you would make more by staying in the ACC and taking this new deal up until 2030. And I think Danny's correct that this being 2030 and not 2036 is pretty important because that's probably the next round of alignment. And you don't want to be realignment, excuse me. You don't want to be locked in to let them pass you yet again. Right. I think
how's your story coming? Chip, how's your story coming?
Oh no, I was just reading the chat.
Oh.
Yeah, I was hanging out in the tailgate. I
can't read the chat.
Chip went and took out the garbage.
Yeah,
I'll be back, guys. You just keep going.
I pulled into spot 308. I was just like, I was hanging out with the tailgate, man. I was curious if Virginia should be a favorite on the road against Coastal Carolina. I was curious.
They both look bad this weekend.
Yeah, I was hanging out in the tailgate.